The preceding is one of the keys that unlocks the Bush 9/11 conspiracy. Bush claims to have seen American Airlines Flight 11 hit the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. on a television set in the Emma Booker Elementary School. The above footage was taken by a French television crew with road workers in an adjacent street and did not surface for more than 24 hours after the event. It is the only single piece of footage in existence which shows the first strike on the towers. It can be clearly seen that this was a commercial jet airliner and not just some small plane. None of the TV networks had this footage, and it was impossible for Bush to have seen this on TV at 8:47 a.m. on 9/11. It is a total lie on the part of Bush to claim that he saw this on TV. It adds further confirmation and affirmation to the fact that Bush has lied about every part of his prior notice and knowledge of the event. Please note the body language of Bush after entering the schoolroom, having regard to the fact that Bush had already been told by Deborah Lauer, director of the White House Situation Room, at some time after 8:46 a.m. that 1. More than one aircraft had been hijacked, and 2. That one of those hijacked airliners had struck the World Trade Center. Bush lied about every aspect of his prior knowledge of the events prior to entering the classroom. On the orders of Bush and Cheney, United Airlines Flight 93 was shot down in complete contradiction to the official reason for the crash of the aircraft. The FBI falsified and lied about the alleged crash time of United Airlines Flight 93, which was 10:37 a.m. and not 10:03 a.m. as officially claimed. This is dealt with at length in Chapter 24b. The FBI falsified and lied about debris falling from United Flight 93 for more than 8 miles along its flight path before crashing, which included a 1-ton section of a jet engine more than 1 mile from the crash site, referred to in Chapter 97A. This deliberate shoot-down of United Airlines Flight 93 takes on a level of evil by the architects of 9/11 of significantly greater magnitude. Control of United Flight 93 had been regained and taken back by the passengers. The safety and welfare of the passengers and crew, as well as people and buildings on the ground, was no longer a concern. Bush and Cheney knew this. Why shoot it down instead of allowing it to land normally? The same modus operandi applies in the same way that it has with every part of 9/11. If anyone on board that plane was allowed to live, the 9/11 conspiracy in its entirety would become known to the world at large. United Flight 93 and all on board couldn't under any circumstance be allowed to survive. Iraq and Saddam Hussein had nothing whatsoever to do with the events of the 11th September 2001. Saddam Hussein had nothing whatsoever to do with any act of terrorism against the United States or any of its allies at any time prior to the 20th of March 2003. Chapter 466 deals at length with the political assassination of Saddam Hussein by Bush, Blair and the Zionist neocons. The former UN Chief Weapons Inspector in Iraq, Scott Ritter, an American, doesn't mince his words regarding the culpability and complicity of Bush, Blair and others. He resigned in protest.
And today I'm very honored to have with me somebody that we've all been following for quite some time now, one of our real heroes, a true American patriot, Scott Ritter. He served 7 years as Chief Weapons Inspector in Iraq for the UN, and he has been in the Marines. He was in the Marines for 12 years.
I've come out with a new book, Frontier Justice, Weapons of Mass Destruction and the Bushwhacking of America, which deals with the Bush administration's fabrication and distortion of facts regarding the threat posed by Iraq's weapons of mass destruction as justification for the war in Iraq. First of all, it centers around the concept of disarming Iraq, getting rid of weapons of mass destruction that Iraq was alleged to possess that threaten the United States of America. We're never going to be able to achieve that because those weapons simply didn't exist by the time we invaded Iraq. That was a false pretense, and that's going to hamstring us because the concept of a legitimate military action in Iraq hinges on Iraq posing a threat to the United States of America that's worthy of war, and what we're seeing is that Iraq didn't possess those weapons, therefore wasn't that kind of threat, therefore we were not justified in invading Iraq. We are desperate for friends and allies to contribute troops to the military effort in Iraq, and yet no one seems to be willing to do so because they don't want to be involved in an illegitimate, illegal enterprise, which of course the invasion of Iraq is. I am able to rest easy knowing that history has proven me right, but I always knew history was going to prove me right. It's not as though I was taking a gamble before the war when I went on TV or on radio shows and it made the statements I made. The statements I made were based upon fact that was available to me, and I was always comfortable with that. Yeah, it's sort of cool that Scott Ritter was right, but what's more critical is that the president lied to us. I think that's what Americans should be focused on, that the president of the United States lied to Congress and lied to the American people in the lead up to this war, and there must be an accounting. He must be held accountable for that lie. Now they're there in Baghdad going, well, excuse me, Mr. President, you asked us to do something based upon false pretext. We are honorable people, and we're now finding that we did something that was dishonorable. We invaded a sovereign nation without cause. We've killed a number of civilians who shouldn't have died. I think it's clear that the United States never had any intention of disarming Iraq, that the focus was always removing Saddam Hussein from power and using the weapons inspection process as an excuse for this regime removal.
One of the big stories was, of course, Dr. David Kelly's suicide this week. Were you familiar with him? Did you work with him?
Yes, Dr. Kelly was a colleague of mine. I worked with him for the 7 years I was a weapons inspector, and he's somebody who I had a tremendous amount of respect for. He was a friend of mine. I knew him quite well, and I mourn his passing. This is a man who had done great things for the world. He had, prior to hunting down Iraq's biological weapons programs, he had been a key player in, helping identify and dispose of the biological weapons in the former Soviet Union. This is a man of honor and integrity who had a lot left to offer the world, and his death has come, too soon. It's terrible for his family, it's terrible for his friends, it's terrible for his country, it's terrible for the world. But one thing I remind people is that this tragedy in no way alters the facts that the Bush government and the Blair government lied. His death in no way alters the fact that we have been lied to on a massive scale by our respective governments.
Well, yeah, look at Blair's people. They're saying it's a political assassination. They want him to resign. So it's a pretty ugly situation.
On issues of war and peace, on issues of such tremendous impact like what has occurred with Iraq, it's not politics as usual. Even the president's own people had said in the build-up to the war that this isn't about politics. This is about something bigger. This is about the United States of America, and I agree totally.
Right.
That's why we cannot allow the president to get away with what has transpired here. He has defrauded the American public. He told a lie. He told a series of lies. It's not just the 16 words in the State of the Union address.
It's everything.
The aspect of everything the president told the American people regarding the threat posed by Iraq's weapons of mass destruction has been shown to be inaccurate, to be a misrepresentation, to be a fabrication. The president must be held accountable for this. He has committed fraud, and for a government official to commit fraud That's a felony, and a felony is a high crime and misdemeanor.
Right.
There are words used in the Constitution to describe an impeachable offense. This is a president who, frankly speaking, should be investigated for a felony in office, and if he has committed this felony, he must be impeached. It is the only way the United States can redeem its credibility. It speaks volumes about the character of a nation if we allow a political figure to get away with the kind of crimes we're speaking about here.
Well, how much of that can you attribute to the media, which seems to just continuously cover all his errors up?
Well, the media is culpable for what has transpired in Iraq. They're more keen on reporting about the deaths of Saddam Hussein's sons than they are about reporting the statement of Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense, who just finished a 5-day tour of Iraq. On his way out, he said, weapons of mass destruction are no longer a priority issue. They are a secondary issue.
Right, and that was the whole reason they supposedly told us to go in there in the first place.
A statement made by a man who, prior to the war, said it's the only reason we're going to war. And I think Paul Wolfowitz should be serving his last days as an American government official, and he should be called upon to resign for these statements and others that he's made. But, they're not going to do it, because once one head rolls, it won't stop till they're all gone. I mean, that's why you're not seeing any resignations right now from the lies that have been told that the president has been caught out on. Therefore, I find it unacceptable when elected officials tell me that in order to protect me, I have to be willing to give up my constitutional rights. No, that's unacceptable. The moment that happens, we no longer stand for the values and principles that define us as Americans, as the greatest nation on the earth. We simply become another set of peoples willing to compromise on fundamental values to support, a tyranny in power. That's unacceptable. And that tyranny right now is the Bush administration, and it needs to be removed.
When asked to name the world's worst terrorists, 95% of people answer, and I quote, the United States, end of quote. Here are just a few examples. There are many, many more, even in Central and South America. On the 6th of October 1976, in an act of US state-sponsored terrorism, Cuban Air Flight 455 was blown out of the sky by C-4 bombs planted by the CIA. All 73 passengers and crew died, the majority of whom were teenagers. On the 8th of March 1985, in an act of US state-sponsored terrorism, a car bomb planted by the CIA in conjunction with British intelligence outside a mosque in Beirut, Lebanon, exploded, killing 80 people and injuring over 250, mainly women and girls. This is dealt with at length in Chapter 67. On the 3rd of July 1988, in an act of US state-sponsored terrorism, Iran Air Flight 655 was shot down by the USS Vincennes in Iranian territorial waters. 290 passengers plus the crew died. I quote this extract from the article at Chapter 6 of the main chapter index. A few seemed oddly at peace. Layla Baybani, 3 years old, was still dressed in her tidy blue dress, black shoes, white socks and little gold bangles on her wrists. 25-year-old Fatima Faidazadeh had been found in the water 3 hours after the crash, still clutching her baby. They were both in the same coffin. Of the 290 passengers who died, more than 60 were children. On the 19th of August 2003, in an act of US state-sponsored terrorism, the CIA truck bombing of the United Nations headquarters in Baghdad, which killed the United Nations Special Envoy Sergio Vera de Mello and 21 others. Over 100 more were seriously injured. This is dealt with at length in Chapter 457. On the 29th of August 2003, in an act of US state-sponsored terrorism, the CIA car bombing of the Imam Ali Mosque in Najaf, Iraq, killing Ayatollah Mohammed Baqir al-Hakim and 125 other people. More than 500 people were injured. On the 19th of May 2004, in an act of US state-sponsored terrorism, Hussein al-Ali from Ramadi, one of the most popular singers in western Iraq, and 41 other people were massacred at a wedding celebration at Muqaddarib, Iraq, by the US military. This is dealt with at length in Chapter 437. On the 22nd of February 2006, in an act of US state-sponsored terrorism, the CIA and US military planted and detonated bombs in the Al-Askari shrine in Samarra, Iraq, with the full knowledge and consent of George W. Bush. This is dealt with at length in Chapter 457 and includes hard evidence of the conspiracy within the BBC to hide and cover up this interview so that it is never heard again by the general public. What you are about to see constitutes war crimes, crimes against humanity and state-sponsored terrorism on the worst end of the criminal spectrum. This will see Bush, Blair and others behind bars with no prospect of release ever. On the 8th of April 2004, more than a year after Saddam Hussein was removed from power, the city of Fallujah was attacked without justification whatsoever with bombs and munitions containing white phosphorus, a banned chemical weapon. The attacks were directed specifically at civilian homes. People around the world who have become witness to this atrocity have described the suffering and anguish by the civilian population of Fallujah, mainly women and children, as beyond measure, description and comprehension. Approximately 6,000 civilians died. 36,000 of the city's 50,000 homes were destroyed, along with 60 schools and 65 mosques and shrines. The following two videos, the first by Japanese film director Toshikuni Doi, speaks for itself, and viewers are warned that what you are about to see is not just truly horrific, but constitutes a wholesale indictment of Bush and the United States' actions and conduct on the worst end of the criminal spectrum. It dispels in one foul swoop any and every single piece of propaganda ever uttered by Bush, Blair, Obama and Gillard governments of a so-called war against terrorism.
We need to remember what this is all about. Our nation is at war. We will not tolerate a safe haven for terrorists who want to destroy Afghan society from within and launch attacks against innocent men, women, and children in our country and around the world.
Please keep in mind at all times, these people who have died or been seriously wounded or disabled, like the 15-year-old boy in the video, are completely innocent, unarmed civilians being attacked in their own homes and streets with weapons of mass destruction.
Number of dead people was more than 700 people. About 25% of them were children, and about this number or percentage was women. Yes, women. Because they attacked the houses of the people.
مال البنات اثنين أطفال صغار. هاي واحدة هاي
عدد جزء أول عدد جزء أول تختلف تربيته وانا صغير هذا الملهي 8 سنين.
شفتها متوسط هي.
وأقعد أشوف الضربة من ضربهم بحضني. هاي اللي بالبداية والله فقدت شوي.
Most of Western media said that most of the injured or killed people are mujahideen, not the people, the common people.
You know, يعني children are not mujahideen and women are not mujahideen, isn't it? Second of all, the attacks were on the houses, isn't it? Third of all the people in Fallujah, they refused the attack. If they call all people of Fallujah mujahideen, it is up to them.
خذ الاشعه صورها.
وين؟
This is 3 pieces, small pieces, and this is.
بس نفتح انا هون.
زين ولين ايش قالوا عليه من الاطباء الشرعيين؟
يقول ما يطلع، ما نقدر نطلع.
ما يطلع. هذا اكثر من 35. صار له ايش قد؟ 35. القصف الامريكي.
Io ero un giornalista embedded con le forze dei Marine americani nel nord del paese e al confine con il Kuwait e sulla strada per Nasiriyah appunto era la strada che era controllata dai Marine, dalla coalizione americana e c'è stato un attacco. 3 giorni più tardi i Marine hanno utilizzato il fosforo nel centro della città. Le persone dalle città intorno a quella dove c'era stato l'attacco sono state curate negli ospedali e la pelle cadeva a brandelli perché era completamente bruciata, le ferite erano molto particolari, la pelle delle gambe, delle braccia era completamente bruciata. C'era un altro uomo che ha perso la pelle sul viso. Tutto quello che era successo era che erano seduti a casa, improvvisamente hanno visto dei missili, delle bombe che hanno attraversato il tetto, il soffitto e sono giunte nelle loro case. Le persone descrivevano il tutto come un'enorme nuvola bianca. Ho parlato anche con uno dei soldati americani e gli ho chiesto che cosa avevano usato e lui mi ha risposto fosforo bianco. Tutto quello che era all'interno delle case era bruciato, anche le 30 persone che si trovavano in quella stanza erano state uccise. Alcuni sono sopravvissuti e non hanno manifestato conseguenze fino a 3-4 giorni dopo l'attacco e non riuscivano comunque a ricordare i dettagli precisi di quello che era successo, ma ricordano chiaramente questa forte luce che ha seguito l'esplosione e la sensazione che i loro corpi stessero bruciando e hanno ripetuto la visione di questa luce bianca. Il personale militare americano, quando parlava delle ferite, dicevano appunto che erano provocate da ustioni da fosforo bianco.
Are you aware of any the use of any non-conventional weapon in general or in Fallujah?
In general or in Fallujah in particular?
In particular in Fallujah, but in general, from the U.S. Army.
Well, this is again where I think that America, with its military superpower status in the world, gets to decide what is conventional and what is not. But depending on what source you ask or who you ask, what's conventional and what's not, what's breaking the Geneva Conventions on correct means of warfare. I personally believe that MK-77, which is basically napalm, white phosphorus bombs, cluster bombs, these are all things that are completely unconventional and totally inhumane. So the military, U.S. military does use unconventional weapons, but according to them, they're totally legal, totally fine. It's just this is the gray area.
Where chemical weapons used in Fallujah?
From the U.S. military, yeah, absolutely. White phosphorus, possibly napalm, may have or may not have been used. I don't know. I do know that white phosphorus was used, which is definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, a chemical weapon.
Are you sure about this? Have you seen?
Yeah, I know. You can't see them use it because it's being dropped from planes or from artillery shells. But yes, we do have white phosphorus in our arsenal, and yes, we did use white phosphorus in Fallujah, which is why that explains all the burned bodies that you can find on the internet, pictures of burned corpses and whatnot. Yes, white phosphorus is used by the U.S. military.
Once again, the mass media in the United States and the UK are officially put on notice. Every single day you continue to cover up, protect, affirm and support these governments and politicians, and their crimes will result in charges of your being active participants and thereby directly complicit in this criminal wrongdoing. As at the 20th of March 2003, not only did Iraq not have any weapons of mass destruction whatsoever, it essentially had no weapons for its own self-defence. This is dealt with at length in Chapter 169. Invasion plans were drawn up by the CIA as early as the 28th of February 2002, which included regime change in Iran as well. I refer you to Chapter 74A. Orders were given by Saddam Hussein not to resist any US military action as referred to at Chapter 233. Every shot fired, every missile launched, every bomb dropped was coming from one direction only. As such, there was no shooting back. There was no war. The whole operation represented a criminal, illegal invasion of a foreign, independent and defenceless country. The human cost of this criminal, illegal act in its entirety has been borne by the civilian population of Iraq. I quote this extract from a 25th of March 2003 article at Chapter 191. The same advisers who convinced Mr. Bush the world has changed after 9/11 and that he needed to go after Saddam will still have his ear. They are likely to convince him that Iran needs to be stabilised. Iraq will be used as a base to press the war on terrorism further. US troops can be expected to make incursions into Syria, Pakistan, Iran and elsewhere that there are likely terrorist influences. Iran, however, will become a target for takeover in much the same way Iraq was conquered. It isn't about terrorism because there is no link to Saddam. It isn't about liberating Iraqi people because we aren't liberating other oppressed nations. It isn't about a Palestinian state because we've shown no commitment to creating one. It's about oil, not terrorism. The US cannot tolerate an adversarial dictator in charge of that much oil. End of quote. The body count in Iraq, Afghanistan and now Pakistan is approaching 2 million people when we include those that died in Iraq due to the effects of the use of depleted uranium munitions, the sanctions between 1991 and 2003 and the war crimes and crimes against humanity committed using weapons of mass destruction by the United States and the UK since the 20th of March 2003, and now they have started on Libya. You will note that Libya was developing nuclear weapons for its own defence, and that Gaddafi gave an undertaking to dismantle Libya's nuclear weapons program in the name of peace and a return to normal diplomatic relations with the rest of the world. Immediately having done so, the United States and other Western countries set out to foment and create political instability in Libya, an oil-rich state, and created a pretext for overt military intervention. Who will pay the price in blood and their long-term economic welfare? The civilian people of Libya.